Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Punch Kick Choke Chat. I'm in Toronto, and it's 8:30 p.m. my time. You're watching this whenever you feel like, or if it's live, you're with us right now from wherever you are around the globe or the continent. I'm so happy you're here with us, and our guest tonight, I've heard his name since I started martial arts, and I can't wait to explore his world. And in doing our research for the show, I am just super excited to hear what this gentleman has to say tonight. And as always, get to be a fly on the wall, chill in the back seat while people with higher ranks than me drive around this conversation that I get to point in certain directions. Yeah, it's just such an honor to be able to be a part of this show. And it's an honor every week to be able to introduce Sensei Niklaus Suino. I always tell you the rank, so you know my respect for him and his 8th dan in Iaido, his 6th dan for Judo and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. Sensei Suino, I was arranging my bookshelves, and I won't show them to you because if you think this is messy here, if I turn my camera, you'd all be aghast. And Sensei Dauphin would not be surprised. And I'm arranging my books, and I was arranging everything in the martial arts category. And, you know, there were 2 books there from Richard Kim. There were 2 books there, Richard Bach, Illusions, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. There's 2 Funakoshi. You know, I'm going down the line. And then what do I see? I see 4 Suinos. I see 4 Suinos. There's nobody better represented in my book collection than 4 Suinos. And it goes Legacy, Hanshi Legacy's Elite Fighter, and then 4 Suinos. Yeah. And, I know that our guest tonight has also written his own books and translated. Sensei Dauphin, we got to get writing.
Yeah, that's why I'm a better student, Sean, because you have 4 Suinos and I have like 14 Suinos. That's why I'm a better student.
So anyways, I just wanted to point that out because that's a true story. And by the way, for those of you on the call who obviously know Sensei Suino through his martial arts acumen, I've mentioned this book before, The Drinking Game. That's a fiction he wrote that to me sits as highly regarded in my collection. How you doing tonight, Sensei Suino?
Doing great. Thanks, Sean. Great to see you as always. I'm hiding out here at the office. I've been here all day. We're having a snowstorm. What I'm sure, you guys you Canadians would think is paltry, but everyone around here is panicking. So, I got to lay low. Thanks so much for the introduction and for mentioning the books. I'm sure you appreciate this because you are committed to your craft. I just don't like watching TV, so I write stuff. Right? That's just how it happens. It falls to me each and every time we do this show, Punch, Kick, Choke, and Chat, to introduce Sensei Randy Dauphin, who's just slightly to my left as I look at the screen right now. Many of you who know him will know much of what I'm about to say, but perhaps not all of it. So he's a 7th degree in Shorin Karate and Hakusuru, which he's gotten from Hanshi Gary Legacy, who's slightly on my right in this call. 3rd degree in Musou Jikiden Asian Ryu Iaido, which I awarded to him, and also a Shodan 1st degree in Seite Ryu Iaido from the Canadian Kendo Federation. One thing I know about Randy is that, like me, he trains and teaches probably 5 days a week, each and every week, sometimes 6 or 7. He's constantly training in martial arts and teaching. He does CrossFit, he runs, he does powerlifting, and many, many other harebrained forms of physical fitness, including this crazy workout we do down here called the JMAC 18. But what I wanted to mention to you today is many of you know that I host an event called Permission, which is about helping people break through their personal obstacles. And we've done 3 of those. It's a huge amount of work to put it together. We try to get 100 people in a room, and we do a 12-hour sort of crucible where we try to get people through their personal obstacles and into a state where they can really learn and plan what happens next. And the first time I created Permission, I sent out some emails to a few friends, and I said, I'm doing this event. I really would like some help. And Randy was one of those people. And I said, I'd love it if you would come and support this event. And he immediately emailed me back and said, yeah, I want to be the first person to sign up for Permission. And I said, well, that would be great, but you missed it by 1 because my business partner, Don Pryor, beat him. But he was right there. He said, listen, let me come down, let me help you out. And he's done it for all 3 events now. No compensation. no thought of asking for anything other than maybe I put him up at my house at night. But he shows up, he does he does a presentation, he helps support the event, he helps promote it. And when he steps on stage, which he's done both alone and also with the lovely Sydney Dauphin, his daughter, he shares what I think is a really important idea and what's been thematic in this show for a long, long time, which is that a very tough martial artist can also be very gentle and can use the lessons of the dojo and walk them out into life. His relationships with his children, his loyalty to his teachers, his commitment to excellence at work. So Randy's an example, or he should be, to everybody who watches this call. And having said that, Randy, how you doing?
I don't think that's some of the nicest things anybody's ever said about me, Sensei. So thanks so much for that. I'm a bit speechless. I'm taken aback by that. The good thing about doing those events is the reward of just getting to sleep on your couch, eat your food, and visit with your family and train with you is much greater than any financial compensation any human being could get, because they're life experiences and there are things that change you and help you to be a better person. So I thank you as well for letting me be part of those things that are important to you. Every week I get to introduce Hanshi Legacy and whoever our guest of honor is, and tonight is Hanshi Ken Tallack. First, I want to talk about Hanshi Daryl Legacy, who is a 10th Dan, and he was awarded that by his teacher, Anthony Sandoval. And, Hanshi Tallack knows a little bit about some of Anthony Sandoval's background. He's also a member of the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. We were talking about the author stuff recently. Author. I'm surprised Sensei Suino's not yelling at me because I got a stack of books that I still haven't shipped to him, and probably going to get some knuckles soon. But luckily for me, the border is still closed, so he can't get at me. But this show has helped me. Like, one of the things I'm going to say about Hanshi Legacy is that he's an honest person. Like, there's no bullshit when you talk to him. He tells you how it is and he tells the truth. And that's rung through for me as a student on this show. As we've talked to people, I think we're like into like 35 shows or something like that. We've interviewed 35 people or 36 people, like Patrick McCarthy, Chuck Merriman, Wally Slokey, John Terrian, Cesar Burkowski, Bill Superfoot Wallace, and all these people say stuff about Sensei Legacy that corroborates things that he has said to me over the last 30 years. And when they say them, I'm always like, I remember Sensei Legacy telling me this in his living room while we were watching a hockey game. So I know for sure he's a really honest person. Another thing is that why I know he's honest, he never shies away. No matter what people say about anything, he always boldly states that he's a student of Harold Warden, Benny Allen, Richard Kim, and Anthony Sandoval. He never shies away from it. Never, ever. I super respect that honesty. Another interesting thing that I was thinking about is he often pushes his students forward in front of him. And when I was in his house recently, we were looking at a video from 1976 and 77 in the Elmwood Casino at a very early kickboxing match. And interestingly, at the end of that video, when he's standing in the ring, even though he had won his fight, he pushes his students to the front. He puts his hands behind both of their backs and he pushes them in front of him. One thing I want to remind everybody about is that for 40 years now, at this time of year, I would normally be sitting in a room at Sensei Legacy's kitchen table, and we'd be shuffling around thousands of pieces of paper trying to organize our annual tournament, which won't be happening this year. It started as the Funakoshi Classic, and it evolved into the Matsumura Challenge. It's a place where most of the people that we've talked to, that's the place where I met most of them, got to interact with them, either in the ring or outside of the ring, refereeing with them, standing at the table. And that tournament is kind of like a testament to Hanshi Legacy's commitment to martial arts and where he's been and the connections that he's made, because it's steadily grown. 2 years ago when we did it, we had 300 people competing, like 300 people competing. That's a pretty big tournament. Like, you know, that's a pretty big draw. And the reason why they come is because of Hanshi legacy and his devotion to martial arts. And the last thing I want to say is the last time I saw him, which was recently, but I'm not going to say when because we're in a lockdown and you're not supposed to see each other right now. But the last time I saw him, which was recently, I was really happy to just do kata with him, 16 or 17 katas in his living room, get some corrections, get some pointers. And in the end, I was really happy to just embrace him and give him a hug and say, I love you, sensei, and hear that in return back to me. So that's my introduction for Hanshi Legacy tonight. And now I'm going to talk about Hanshi Ken Tallack, who started his martial arts training in the 60s, much the same as Sensei Suino at a YMCA, interestingly, but in London, not in Michigan. In 1972, he started training with another name that's very important to Hanshi Legacy and myself, a name, Bob Dalgleish. He started training with him in Sudbury, where he relocated himself and started training there in Goju-Ryu. In 1976, he opened up the Martial Arts Fitness Center in London. Between 1979 and 1982, he competed a lot. He competed at various international martial arts competitions, placing first in the Canadian National Butoku Kai Championships 3 years in a row, and second at the Butoku Kai International Championships in 1981. He has a long involvement in training, participants promoting kickboxing events in Ontario, and in 1986, Hanshi Tallack became an official with the Ontario Athletics Commission, and I think we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. In 1985, he traveled to Japan, where he's accepted as the first Canadian student of the Grand Master Yagi Meitoku
Sensei.
Meitoku Sensei, thank you, who is the inheritor of the system Goju-Ryu from Miyagi Chojin. And in that same year, he introduced the Meibukan Goju-Ryu system to Canada. He was awarded his 5th Dan from, who was it, Hanshi? How do you pronounce it?
Meitoku Sensei.
Meitoku Sensei. That's who he received his 5th Dan from. In 1991, Hanshi Tallack was issued a master's grade through the Dai Nippon Butoku Kai when he had the chance to perform in front of the Prince Higashi Fushimi in Kyoto, Japan at the annual Dai Nippon Butoku Kai Festival. That's something that nobody else on this call can say that they've been able to do. In 1998, Hanshi Tallack was asked to be the Canadian national representative for the Dai Nippon Butoku Kai, and he still holds that position to this day. In 1999, he was issued his Kyoshi and his 7th Dan certificate by that same organization. And then in 2006, his 8th Dan. In 2012, he was awarded the Hanshi title in Japan, and he's the first Canadian through the Dai Nippon Butoku Kai to be awarded that certification. In 2014, he received his 9th Dan degree, Black Sash, from Grandmaster David Chong, who I know Hanshi Legacy knows as well. In 2017, he was inducted into the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. So Hanshi Tallack and Hanshi Legacy have that in common with each other as well. And I always like to give a couple of my thoughts. I've met Hanshi Tallack a few times. I met him at Angela Feist's tournament maybe 5 years ago. I remember meeting him there and talking to him and a few of his students at various kickboxing events. And even Sean, I think you remember once out on the docks, there was an outdoor event where Hanshi Tallack was actually refereeing. And most recently, just when Hanshi Legacy was inducted, that was, I got to talk to Hanshi Tallack a little bit there. Even when we went into a hotel room with John Pearson and Leo Laux, the 4 of us were in that room together. Another thing I want to say is I took some time and I looked on the internet, and you should really look at his dojo in Kingston. It's beautiful. It's a 3-floor dojo. It's a multi-space facility. It's got 2 big dojos with tatami and 1 with hardwood. And one of the things when I look at that, a person who's not committed to martial arts does not put the effort into creating a facility like that for people to learn in. So when I look at it, that's what I see. I see a beautiful space, and I see a person who's committed to make something like that happen. Another thing that I know through everything that I just said is he's traveled. It's not like today where we can just jump on the internet and find things. He's the person who's had to find the information, right? It's easier today. And he's searched far and wide across the globe. He's spread the word through his traveling and his teaching, and he's helped lots of other people to develop that. And I'm super excited to hear his story, and I'm proud to have him here tonight on Punch Kick Choke Chat. So Sean, take it away.
Thanks so much, Sensei Dauphin. And one thing I just want to say quickly, I really love the way our intros go. Like, I've really loved the groove of this. And I had a great chat with Sensei Dauphin this week, and he gave me a bit of a lesson on the difference between traditional and non-traditional martial arts. And what I loved about our conversation is things are done a certain way in traditional martial arts. And I really like the way we've gotten into this groove of introducing one another. And I get a little giddy with it every time. On that note, everybody watching, we got our first sponsor, Ayi. So I'm about to read an ad that is from our first sponsor. So when you hear this ad, just know that what we get in return is that we have a full page ad now in the magazine that our sponsor puts out. And so we're pretty excited about that, because as we grow our show and as we create this living history with our guests, we want as many eyes on this as possible. So we hope this is a fruitful relationship. Here's the ad, everybody. Hi. This is Don Warner from WARRENER Entertainment.com. That's WarnerEntertainment.com. We are proud to be one of the sponsors of Punch Kick Choke Chat. We encourage you to visit our website at WarnerEntertainment.com. Get your free copy of Warriors Magazine today. We have over 2,500 items, including books, DVDs, downloads, rare posters, lots more, featuring some of the biggest names in the martial arts. Shotokan's Hirokazu Kanazawa, Goju Ryu's Chuck Merriman, Ninja Stephen Hayes, legendary Joe Louis, and that's just the beginning. That's Warner Entertainment, WARRENER Entertainment.com. And thanks for listening. Keep smiling. Also, this will be said 3 times on each show, correct? Correct. So that's one for 3.
Before you go, though, I just want to say that it's hard for me not to call him Sensei Warner, because he likes me to just say Don Warner, but this is really good for the people that we have on, and it's good for the history of martial arts that he puts this in his magazine, because it drives everybody back and they get to hear the stories from the different people that we're trying to promote. So
thanks, Sensei. Thanks for that. And now we're into the meat of our interview. Hanshi Tallack, how are you tonight? How's things?
Oh, fine, thank you. So I guess I just look at the screen and talk. Is that right?
Absolutely. And then
Okay,
different of us will throw questions your way. This is all for you. This is all about you. And then I'll just kind of guide us through a chat. So why don't we start where I tend to start with most of our guests, which is, I believe you were born in London. What was life like for you? What brought you into your first dojo, and what made you stay there?
Well, yeah, actually I was born in St. Thomas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm an Elgin County boy. That's right. I know Gary is too these days, a transplant. But from the time I walked into the judo room at the YMCA in London, Ontario, I just felt natural. I felt at home. And in those days, my mother worked at Eaton's in downtown London. Mm-hmm. And I suspect that I was sent to the YMCA as like a daycare on Saturday. And when my brother engaged in other activities, I would spend as much time in the judo room as I could.
And you were pretty young now, right? You were 7 years old, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Early 60s.
I mean, that's it, right? That's the beginning here in Canada. What made you go, this is it, I'm this guy now, instead of, cool, judo's fun on Saturday, but I don't care about it, and I'm off to play sports with my friends the way everyone else does?
Yeah, je ne sais quoi, huh? It was just my thing. I just, from the time I walked into the dojo, I felt good about it, and I enjoyed the challenge. I had a little bit of success in the judo room. It wasn't really, looking back on it, it was more of a kids' recreational program. It certainly was not a belt structured program that I was involved in. But I sure enjoyed it. I loved it. I just love to fight, love to wrestle, get in there and do it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
And by the way, just so you know, we won't be the only people asking you questions. And I did forget to mention this because of our new ad that we're reading is everybody watching, we want your questions as well. So please write those in the chat button at the bottom. And then Robbie and Andre have put up, please enter your questions for Hanshi Tallack. And then we'll ask any good ones as they seem timely and appropriate. So you're a kid, you're loving fighting, you're scrapping. And then can you talk us through your journey as you fundamentally make your way from a judo kid who's essentially in a daycare, so to speak, to someone who's taking this seriously, looking at Kung Fu, and take as long as you want to make your way to Sudbury with Sensei Bob Dalgleish?
Okay, well, so around 1967, roughly, sometime in there, 66 or 67, a fellow moved in next door to us. His name was Reed, Val Reed, and he was from Scotland. And after I cut his grass for him a few times, he asked me if I'd like to try doing some karate. And he told me that he had studied Okinawa Te in Scotland. And it's interesting because today I think that it may have come to Scotland from one of the sources for here in Canada, which was the international effort to build I think the Suez Canal. After the Second World War, there were Japanese engineers sent to Egypt, and there were Canadian military there to help with the excavation or whatever. I really don't know the details. And apparently someone there had a dojo and shared karate with those young Canadians and probably Scotsmen who were there in whatever roles they were playing. I really don't know exactly what they were doing, but a fellow named Albert Anastasiadis came back from there to Montreal and started teaching karate around early 1957. And I met a fellow named McKenna who told me he was part of that group and he had done karate there as well. And I kind of think that's where Val Reed's lineage came from.
And I wondered, have you done any homework, or do you have any idea what that Japanese lineage of Okinawa Te was? Like whose branch that might have been?
I've never found any information on that.
That's a really cool meeting point in Egypt.
Yeah, but that's what Pat McCarthy would do. Right? McCarthy would find out who it was, for sure.
So how'd you like karate coming from judo?
Yeah, well, you know, so I started doing karate in my neighbor's basement with him. And myself and a couple of boys I went to school with, we all did that. And then Mr. Reed hurt his back, I believe, and our training was done without him for a little bit. And he recommended I go join the London Karate Club. And at that time, there was a dojo on Dundas Street near Rectory, on top of a paint store, beside the old Biltmore bowling alley. Okay. Anyhow, it was on the second floor, and they had 6 windows in the front, Karate, and I saw that place, so I went there. And yeah, I joined. That turned out to be the Canadian Karate Kung Fu Club.
And at this time, did you decide to continue with the judo at all, or did you move right into the karate and kung fu at this point?
I had left judo behind some time before. When I wasn't going to the YMCA anymore, I quit doing judo.
Yeah, so that was your taste, and then when you were mowing the lawn, that got you into the karate and the kung fu pretty much for good.
I had, myself and a couple of friends, we had I can recall clearly putting mattresses down in basements and practicing break falls and doing the judo throws and rolls and getting a couple of old books and trying the jujitsu out of that. And it was just always an interest that I had. So moving into the karate dojo was a really great experience, but it was a very different experience.
And I wonder, Sensei Suino, do you know, I mean, is there any chance you would have interacted with similar judo people at that time? Would there have been any overlap? I know you were young doing it, Hanshi Tallack.
Yeah, I mean, I started judo in 1968, but everything I did, all the training and tournaments I did were in Southeast Michigan. So now there's a big presence in Windsor and areas like that. But at that time, I was just a kid doing judo. I don't know if you ever came to Michigan, but I don't think we probably competed against each other.
Did you ever throw the mattresses down, Sensei Suino? Did you ever do the basement judo?
I always throw the mattresses down, Sean.
Hey, hey-oh, hey-oh.
For history's sake, can I ask Sensei Tallack if he might remember the judo sensei's names or name?
Yeah, not really. There was, I said it was kind of more like a daycare program. There's a fellow named Chip who was probably in charge of that room.
Okay, I just thought it would be interesting if I knew who they were, just to make a connection. But I understand. Yeah.
It's a good question. There was a time I knew a few names, but it's so long ago. I'm sorry, it just slips my mind entirely.
No, that makes sense. Ken, makes sense.
So one question I have for you, and this is something that I tend to ask of most of the guests in one way or another. You're in a basement with a gentleman who's starting to teach you karate that you believe he got through a Scottish lineage, through Okinawa, through Egypt. But fundamentally, for the first little while, it's just you and a couple buddies in a basement. And, I did start at Western with Hanshi, but then I spent the next 2 years of my training, just me and Sensei Dauphin in a park and in squash courts, nothing formal, and then that's how I started with my student who's now a black belt. What are your thoughts on when someone gets to walk into the glossy dojo with all the weapons on the wall and it's fantastic versus somebody like yourself who's got what are the pros and cons of each way of finding your way through the front door?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And I think it's easier to start martial arts training today than it was when I was a kid. I think the information is all much more readily available. In those days, as someone mentioned already, there was, obviously, this is long before the internet, but this is before there was even a Kung Fu movie had not come out in Canada in those days. There was no information available other than some judo books, Bruce Tegner's books, things like that. That was at that time. So those of us who really wanted to learn, we found a way to learn.
Wow.
And, we didn't give up. I guess that's the main thing. I guess it doesn't really matter where you start. It just matters if you give up or not. You don't give up, you stay with it.
Yeah.
You got to go longer than 30 years or you're a quitter, according to
Yeah.
But Hanshi Tallack, that's one of the things is you moved to Sudbury to train with Bob Dalgleish. That's a similar theme that we've heard of many people, right? Is Hanshi Legacy used to leave London and go to Toronto to train with Benny Allen. Chuck Merriman said that he actually left one side of the United States and moved to New York City to learn karate, like left his wife and family behind. So I agree with you when you say it's easier now. It's definitely easier now, which makes it irritating when people say, according to Kiyoshi Rice, who I know is on the call tonight, there's train tracks and I couldn't get to the dojo tonight, right? Like it's...
So talk to us about then that next 5 years that before you got your way up to Sudbury, and anything notable you want to mention about your time at that karate and kung fu club.
Well, sure. The first night I was there, Bob Wilcox was my coach, and Bob was wearing a green belt at that time, and he showed me how to do a low block, and I said gate ambarai, and he was surprised I knew the word. And I was so proud that I did, right? So right from that moment, I made a connection with Bob. And it's lasted. So, it was very significant. But as a child in the dojo at that time, so I guess I was 12 years old,
Mhm.
In 1967, I was 12 and 13 because my birthday's in June. I had the perceptions of a child. I perceived things the way a child does. I didn't really grasp what was going on around me with the interaction of adults, which is what happens when you put a child in a class with adults. But I never came up in a kids class. Right. They did have a kids class, but it was for younger ones. So I just joined and I came in the adult classes from that time forward. So having interaction with adults at that time was quite different. In those days, men were not always wearing hats when they went outside anymore. Men were not always wearing shirts and ties, but you always did to church or to school or anything like that. Society was still at that time rooted in that those ways that were soon to be left behind. Mm-hmm. As social mores and walls were broken down, right? For me, I had the opportunity of learning from so many great people and being able to see so many of these guys who are absolutely dedicated to developing perfect technique. And I really, I appreciated their effort and I tried to copy that. And I saw that for most of them, attaining a level of perfect technique was a driving force in their lives. And it became a driving force in my life as well. Over the next years, the club developed. When I was a kid, Tony Chong and Pel Capone used to drive from Toronto to London once a week or twice a week and train us. And I mean, the dedication they showed doing that was incredible. In those days, as Hanshi Legacy will remember, you could get from Toronto to London in an hour and a half on the 401. And these young fellas did that a couple of times a week for a couple of years. After those couple of years, I think Tony graduated, Pell graduated, went on to law school. Anyhow, they quit coming to London. And so the London club changed to becoming an actual club run by Londoners. I guess around 1970, one day I went in and everybody was gone. And these are people like Holger Craik, Bob Wilcox, Doug Horton, Al Lynn, Doug Brown, Myron Hladniuk, and I could go on. There was probably about a dozen guys who I always saw at the club. But one day I go in the club and none of them are there. Just Ron Leidstad is the only one there. And so I'm a kid. I don't really question it. Years later, I found out all those guys moved over to Harold Warden's club. And Gary Prob might remember when they came there, or might not, yeah. But yeah, they all moved over there. And many times over the years, I thought, it's too bad none of them called me and said, hey, Kenny, we're not going to be here this week. We're going over there. But nobody told me. So I just kept going to the place I've been going to. And Ron basically let us run the classes. And, you know, here I was 15 years old by that time and teaching classes all summer long. I loved that. I thought that was a great deal of fun. And before I was 16 years old, Ron had given me a key for the dojo. So I was able to go in there regularly, and I certainly did.
Yeah. And so, you know, just talking about you being that age in a club more of adults, not necessarily, you know, not considering yourself in the kids' classes, was it tough? Was it a grind, or were you, you know, how was that?
Well, I loved it. I mean, I loved it. I was in with adults. I was in with these young adults, many. Doug Summers, whose brother Jim, I know, Doug was another guy who went over, right? He was a guy I trained with. Well, so I was 14 and he was 17 and he had a car and etc. And I thought he was just, a great role model guy, right? So I loved it, being that age, being with those guys, being relatively accepted. The downside of that is, of course, we had no safety gear. It had not been invented yet, karate safety gear. And being a kid, sparring with adults, even if they were young adults, I paid the price and got a fracture here and a fracture there and a fracture here and there. And this side got fractured and that one got fractured. And by the time I was 22, I'd lost most of my teeth. And that was a result of a kid bare knuckle sparring with adults, controlled sessions. But everybody got hit, right?
So similar question to what I asked before, and then I actually want to throw something to Sensei Dauphin, but similar question. That's not happening today. And here you are grinning and laughing about this. What are your thoughts on safety gear coming up the hard way as a kid who's cutting his teeth on adults versus, I mean, yeah, adults and kids are sparring today, and that's what I'm going to throw to Sensei Dauphin for, but not without gear, not without mouthpieces. Would you do it differently, or did you dig that?
Well, we can't compare the standards of 2021 to the standards of 1968.
Yeah.
Right. They just don't relate. The things that we did, the way we were raised. I didn't see a seatbelt till 1970, for instance, right? Just to put safety concerns on a level.
Yeah.
It just wasn't like that back then. But as there's a time and place for safety gear. My dear friend Yogi Israel, I remember him years and years ago when the safety gear first came out, and they were like white pillows that went over your hands, right? And he found out that, because he lives way up north in Ontario, he found out if he left them in the car to the last minute and he brought them inside for sparring, they were like little rocks on his hands. So much for safety gear, right?
What I just wanted to ask you, Sensei Dauphin, is I know that at your club, the one you're sitting in right now, you don't separate the children and the adults. And I just want to have you talk about your feelings about that and see if you two can relate on that.
Sean, for me, you've probably heard me say things like, everybody comes to class, I throw a bucket of water out and you determine how wet you get. Right? So whether you're a kid or whether you're an adult, maybe I don't swear as much, but I probably do. And that's probably it. Like if you come here and you're a kid, you're a young person, I'm going to try and teach you traditional martial arts the way I see it and the way it was taught to me. I'm not going to tone it down too much. I mean, it's no different than if there's an adult here and I'm fighting with them and they're a white belt and they've never fought before, I'm going to fight them at a white belt level. And if they're a little kid, and they're fighting me, I'm going to fight them at that level. And if they're a white belt or a little kid, they're probably going to get a couple bruises if they're fighting with me. And
yeah,
that's part of it. And on the safety equipment side, I think that's more a new thing, like newer. I remember fighting with Sensei Legacy, never wearing equipment. And then one day him saying, we should wear some equipment because we'll be able to fight longer. It wasn't about us like being safer. It was about us being able to fight for a longer period of time. And that's why he told me to start wearing equipment. So I don't know, I guess it's your mentality for why you're wearing equipment, right?
Thanks, Sensei. What do you think? Does that jive with your thinking, Hanshi Tallack?
Well, I do things considerably differently, but I'm not sure how many people you might have in a class. I certainly have been separating children by age groups for decades now and had tremendous success with it. And we have programs specifically geared for 4 and 5-year-old children, then 6 and 7-year-olds, and then 8, 9, and 10, then 11 to 13, and then teenagers and up. And some of those things are to do with developmental levels, what you can expect of a 4-year-old or what you can expect of an 8-year-old. Certainly the exercises that benefit a 4-year-old may be insignificant to an older child, but yet that 4-year-old who grows up starting doing these balance and control exercises, by the time they're 16 and they have full flexibility and complete use of their limbs, and hopefully in a good, strong body, you see the results of that.
See, I like fighting 4-year-olds, Hanshi Tallack, because I know I can take them. Like, I know I'm going to win that fight every time, but I'm totally kidding.
So before we jump you up to Sudbury, did you and Hanshi Legacy run into each other before that, or did you meet after? When did you guys run into each other?
I know the first time I saw Gary Legacy. Sorry, guys. I don't know if you know how famous he was in the city of London. Like before karate. I have a sister who's a little bit older than me, and she was quite aware of who you were, Gary, prior to your karate days. And she was a member of your extended social circle.
Oh, can we get her on the call? Can we get her?
Yeah. I don't know if we want to wake her up right now, but yeah, no, Gary was well known to me. And then I heard he was doing karate. I never met him. March 15th, 1973, Hamilton, Ontario. There's a karate tournament. 1,100 students. 1,100 in the men's white and yellow belt division. We had a guy named Stefan Latujic for London who won 7 matches and didn't get a medal.
Holy shit.
There was like 1,600 people at this tournament. And it's night. And it's my 3rd black belt tournament. And it's the nighttime show is coming, right? And who comes out to fight in the finals but Gary Legacy? And that's the first time I ever saw you. I saw you with a spotlight on you, walking forward to go out and fight in the finals at that tournament. Now, I think you were under black belt, but you must have been close to it at that time. You don't remember
Depends
that?
Which time. I can't remember which time, honestly. But thanks.
Well, you did a great job. You won, I think. I think you won. But just your, that was the first time seeing you. It was pretty spectacular entrance, man.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But I really want to know what your sister has to say about him. That's what I want to know.
Well, it's another story. Yeah.
Well, so, I'm glad I did good on the entrance.
Well, you did a great in the ring too. Really, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. Gary probably had 5 or 6 matches to get to that end at least.
Yeah.
Maybe more. That's a lot for any given day at a tournament, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Anyhow, no, I didn't know Gary earlier. Into the late 70s, late 60s and early 70s, when Tony and Pell quit coming to London, the club went through some changes. Ron Lydstad ended up with it. And then we ended up in a boys' club on Booley Street in London, Ontario for about a year. From there, we went to the Boys and Girls Club in London, Ontario. And that was a non-profit club. That was intended to be a non-profit club at that time, right? And we were up at the Boys and Girls Club. We had the 4th floor for probably the last of 71 and throughout 72 into June of 73. And going into a non-profit place like that changed the club a lot. Ron Lydstad developed a great group of people, including Ron Day, Vince Ayek, Keith Ayek, David Durant, Bruce Curry, Jim Grass, Russ Lovell, myself, and that were all people who were homegrown by Ron Leinstad through that Canadian Karate Kung Fu Club. But when we went into the nonprofit place, Ron didn't keep a connection with anybody else. He was just running it on his own. And soon after that, around 1972, he connected with the Fire Dragon Kung Fu. And that was, he found his path in life through that. There he was. And the club, though, through that process, our club really morphed from a karate kung fu club into a kung fu club.
And that
was great.
Pardon me.
You know, it was great, but you know, I always enjoyed doing karate. And you know, for me, though, as long as I had the forms to work on, I was fine. You know, I did the leopard, the dragon, the tiger, and crane many, many, many times in those days.
I remember seeing you doing it. It was nice.
There's
Yeah,
actually
well,
there's videos out there from Hanshi McCarthy with Hanshi Tallack doing stuff way back in the 70s. If you go on his page and you want to see it, I think I recently watched a video of you, Hanshi Tallack, with some twin swords, doing something with some twin swords, possibly.
oh yeah, yeah, that was back. So I think that old video is from '78, and you know, talk about how much more difficult was it in those days? Well, I couldn't get proper double swords. I could not buy double swords. Today, you can buy them. I've seen them for sale at gas stations, for God's sakes. You know, we had to use machetes instead. They were the closest we could come to.
Fucking A. Love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked about 1972 there, and then is that when you did end up in Sudbury training with Sensei Dalglish? Is that, am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, you know, in I was kind of I left home pretty early, and I was kind of transient around Canada in the 1970, 71 winter. I spent most of that in Winnipeg area. I was put up by the Salvation Army at yeah, and they took me in, took care of me at that time, and I used to go shovel snow. But I was kind of transient in those days. I went from dojo to dojo. When I was in Winnipeg like that, I was at the Samurai Dojo on Portage Street, I think. It was very near the corner of Portage and Main, which was famous at the time.
Yep.
It's a long time ago. Yeah, anyhow, I traveled around, and London was my base. I would come back to London, and then I would be transient again. And yeah, so one night I took a train from somewhere near Sault Ste. Marie to as far as it would take me, which was Sudbury. And I didn't have a paid ticket. I jumped on the back of it where there was an open car, and it was not uncommon to do that in those days. And but if you did that, you had to exit the train before it came to a full stop, because then you'd be in the yard and they could catch you and you get in all kinds of trouble. So it seemed like a good idea at the time, but it got to be a pretty long, slow, freezing cold train ride that day.
Whew.
And it was after Remembrance Day. It was in late November, I guess, of '71. And I jumped out of this freight train just at the edge of Sudbury, and I don't know where I'm going. I don't have a nickel. I don't have anything to eat. I'm like lost. And I look up, I try to, you know, I got to get off of this train thing and across this yard. It's snowing. I look up and there's a Goju fist painted on the outside of a building with a light on it. I couldn't believe it, right? And I went, I knocked on the door, and it was a dojo, Sudbury Goju Kai. And this old man came, and he said the dojo wasn't open, but I could come back the next morning. And he told me there was a local hostel that I could go stay at. So I did that. I went to that hostel, I stayed overnight, and I came back to the dojo the next morning. And wasn't a very big dojo. And I guess the sensei lived upstairs. And he had a makiwara. I said, oh, I love hitting the makiwara. So I hit the makiwara a few times and I broke it. I broke his makiwara. I had not even met the sensei yet. And I broke his makiwara. So the old guy, his name was Slim. It turns out that's Bob Dalglish's father, Slim Dalglish. Slim came up and said, oh, don't worry about it, it's okay. And I started hitting the bag, and I'm doing these running, flying kicks on the bag. And guess what? I split the bag. I still haven't met the sensei yet. And now I've really damaged the place. And Bob comes downstairs eventually, and he goes, cool, cool, that's great. Look at what you did. That's awesome. And we started training. And then kids came in for kids classes and we taught them. And that was the beginning of my relationship with Bob.
That's a fantastic beginning.
It's, you know, I've thought of that story so many times over the years. And, you know, I could have left that train a kilometer before. Not much after, but, you know, it was time to get off. But it's these little things in life that give you a direction that you might not have found otherwise, right? Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So a year later, the end of September, October 1972, I moved into the attic of that building. And Bob took me in at that time, and I stayed with him for the next 6 months. Yeah, me and Yogi Israel.
I know Yogi. He's a good friend of mine.
Yes, of course he is. Yeah, but we were roommates in those days. Iz had just come to Canada, and he was, I think he's 10 years older than me. And certainly at that time, because at that time in 72, when we moved in, when we were living together, I was 17. I think he was 27. And so that's quite an age difference, right? So I learned a lot of things from Yogi. Some better than others. But, you know, it was a lot of fun. And it was an incredibly, incredibly exciting time, because who would have known? Oh yeah, by the way, Gary, you'll remember this, I'm sure. Remember when Bob Dalglish, Benny Allen, and Wally Slokey did a seminar in London? Yes. On Glasgow Street?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 2 weeks after that I moved into Bob's place with him.
I just want to say, Ken, that, you know, in a lot of stories that I listen to, all the people, the ones who've been in it for a long time, like you and I, their story is always of the martial arts calling them. And I don't think they realize your story, that sign, Dalglish, and, you know, knowing you, not just in the past, but knowing you more now, I think you were being called.
Seemed like it. It certainly seemed like it. I had a calling, and I followed it. And it's never, you know, a lot of people have come and gone. My dear wife, she says we find things for a reason or a season or a lifetime. People come to the dojo for a reason. Okay. Some come for a season or two. And some of us are here for a lifetime. And I think I'm one.
You are.
And I think a lot of you folks watching right now, you're all in that same lifetime club.
We're 30 years plus.
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah.
Shit. Nah, I'm still chipping. I'm still chipping.
Yeah. You'll get
So-
there, Ben. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Don't be a quitter, Benson.
We'll see you in a year and a half.
So can I tell you, I gotta tell you this, the life-changing thing, the next life-changing thing that happened in Sudbury in 1972 was the Bruce Lee boom.
Hmm.
Kung Fu came on television. Nobody knew anything about Kung Fu, but I just spent 3 years of my life practicing it. Bob Dalgleish put an ad in the Sudbury Star saying, karate class, Tuesday night, 7 o'clock. Everybody welcome. 150 people showed up. 150 people answered that ad. His dojo was about 14 feet wide and 30 feet long. That's where Don Gauthier started and where Don Benoit started, guys like that up there in Sudbury. They started in that room, that size. Well, 150 people could not physically fit in there no matter how you stacked them up. It was an incredible thing. Bob went and rented the sample hall and he had a microphone. We had 150 people. And it went from being a hobby to being an industry. There was an industry that created itself overnight. And Gary was in London at that time. I think you had the Karate Canada Club at that time. And I'm sure you experienced the very same thing. It was a boom. And it went from 0 to full speed ahead in a week. It was an incredible thing to see, for better and worse, because not every one of those guys who were running dojos were prepared to have suddenly people giving them thousands of dollars a month for lessons. In 1970, you're running a club. If you had 50 guys in a club, 100 guys was a huge club. Well, by early 1973, they were lined up every day to come and join, well, in those days for us, Kung Fu. Yes, it was a life-changing thing. Were you involved in Michigan at that time, Nicholas?
Yeah, well, I was part of the judo boom that happened here, right? Just so, we trained and it was pretty good in around 68. And the AAU judo tournaments had 300, 400, 500, 600 kids in them. So that's what I experienced. I don't know what I remember when the Bruce Lee movies came out, it didn't have a direct effect on us.
Can I ask you, Nick, if, and Ken, of course, do you think, I was going to say that sort of the demise or there was a big judo thing going on. I remember at the beginning, there were judo clubs everywhere. And then when karate started to seep in, do you think they bumped heads? Do you think that you don't see very many, or you didn't see very many judo schools, say in the 80s, 90s? Do you think that was affected by karate or no?
I don't know, like you, I've always watched the ups and downs, right? A lot of times it's influenced by movies or these days by the UFC. I think that was a big part of it. I think that there's an audience of people that don't really know the difference between karate and kung fu and judo, right? And so they just go where they're called. But judo's always struggled a little bit because it's not necessarily a spectator sport in the same way karate is. It's sometimes a lot harder to see. I don't know, that may be an excuse because BJJ is not really a spectator sport either, but I've always felt that karate is much easier for the average person to watch and understand. What do you think, Hanshi Tallack?
Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting point of view. One of the points of view that I had put forward in a couple of group sessions I was part of in the 80s was regarding putting karate in the Olympics at that time. And the point of view was brought out that the Olympics changed judo forever. That judo, before it was an Olympic sport, had more self-defense component and more and less of the sport. And judo, by the center of 1980s, was a well-established Olympic sport. And even bowing, courtesy, the budo aspect of judo was not necessarily always there. It was no longer a requirement. And, there's a lot of talk at that time about the Olympics changing judo, and maybe it wouldn't be that great a thing for karate. Well, taking that a little further, I'm not sure that the Olympics did much of a favor for Taekwondo either, because it became, again, Taekwondo became so narrow, and there was no longer the self-defense aspect. Their hands are down at their sides, they're jumping around, facing each other backwards. I saw it, I couldn't believe it. If you remember Mr. Chang Young Che in London years ago, he was a fighter. He was a tough guy who did Taekwondo. He didn't dance around like that. Well, it's a point of view anyhow, that the Olympics don't necessarily build a martial art. They might create a new sport. Maybe it wasn't so good for judo.
Good point. Good.
Sensei Dauphin, I know you had a thought you wanted to chuck in before we get to a few questions.
Yeah, I just like, that's I'm going to be thinking about that Olympic comment for many weeks now. I'm going to think about it creating a sport. That's really interesting comment for me. Hanshi Tallack, when you and I talked earlier in the week, one thing that we're an hour in, like we've already been talking for an hour. The time always flies by faster than we think it's going to. And when you and I talked last, you wanted to talk a little bit about your sensei and the Dai Nippon Butoku Kai and your involvement with them and what it is in Canada. And I just think it's important that we get a chance to talk about those things with you. You've done some things with that organization that not a lot of people can say that they've been able to do. So how did you find your sensei there, and how did you get to the Dai Nippon Butoku Kai? Like, what transpired there, and why are you still with them now?
Well, yeah, so there's two separate things there. My training in Okinawa with Yagi Meitoku Sensei was between 1985 and 1993. In 1994, my sensei had retired, his son took it over, and he removed me from his organization for his own reasons. And so my association with Meitoku Sensei was from 1985 to 1993. And he was just a wonderful guy who just loved karate. He just loved it. He did it every day. I met him when he was sitting in a corner doing calligraphy. And he invited me to come back for training the next morning. Then I realized this was a guy that Richard Kim had told me so much about. This was Yagi Meitoku. This is Chojin Miyagi Sensei's representative in Okinawa. Said, come on over tomorrow morning for training. Okay, I guess I could fit it in. I just can't tell you how honored, how thrilled I was. As Hanshi Legacy knows quite well, Richard Kim was a wonderful mentor, and when he gave us direction in our lives, it was usually pretty good. We just thought so much of Richard Kim in those days. Anyhow, getting back to Okinawa, so Pat McCarthy had called me up and said, hey, I got an extra ticket. You want to buy it and come to Okinawa? I said, okay, let's go. And that's how we went to Okinawa together in '85. I met Meitoku Sensei and I began training with him. And I did my very best to work with him as closely as I could and to pay attention to what he was doing. For this aspect of Budo, the discipline is that of forming your body perfectly, exactly as your teacher wants you to. And it doesn't really matter which method that is. It just matters that you control your body with your mind. And through that, you will experience this Buddha training. And Meitoku Sensei was like that every day. He trained, and it was always disciplined, diligent training. And I met him in 85. I spent about 6 weeks there. I went back in 86 for another 6 weeks. I visited again in 87 to 88. And in 1990, I moved my family to Japan. And we moved to Hokkaido, Japan, where I had, I've been hired by a company to work in northern Japan. And yeah, I picked them all up. We sold a bunch of stuff and moved to Japan to learn to speak Japanese language sufficiently to be able to study with Meitoku Sensei. Meitoku Sensei spoke Japanese. I did not. I had to learn. So we moved to Ashibetsu, Hokkaido. And that's a little village in the middle of the mountains in northern Japan. And I had some marvelous experiences there. But one of the things that living in Japan allowed me to do was it allowed me to join the Dainippon Butoku Kai Hombu in Kyoto. Now, we'd all been members of the Butoku Kai in Canada, and Hanshi Legacy was president at one time of one part of the Butoku Kai of Canada. But that was a totally different organization than the Dainippon Butoku Kai in Kyoto. And it took, over the years, that came out. But by the time I was in Japan, Pat McCarthy had joined the DMBK in Kyoto. So he invited me, and I was so anxious to go, to come to Kyoto and join the organization myself. In the middle of preparing for that, I had to return to Canada on business, and my father passed away. And suddenly, and it was a blow. That was a big blow. So going back to Japan and going to Kyoto and going to the Butoku Den, it was a fabulous experience. Walking the dojo floor, being accepted as a member, going to the party with Pat. A party with Pat is always a good time, but it was all overshadowed with the loss of my dad. And when I think of that time, I got to say, it's always there. Anyhow, that was my introduction to the Dainippon Butoku Kai. So in 1991, we moved from Hokkaido to Okinawa. And I took an apartment next door to my sensei's home. And we stayed there for the next year and a half. And myself, my wife at the time, Sharon, and our two children, Rob and Alicia. So the kids grew up in Japan speaking Japanese. My son, Rob, loved martial arts. He just loved it. He did Kobudo Tuesday and Thursday. He did karate Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And he said, Dad, there's a guy who's teaching Iaido on Sunday. Can I go join that? So I bought him a hakama and sent him off. And wasn't that great, huh? He just loved it. He just had a great time growing up in Japan, being a dojo bum. We made him do his schoolwork too. Yeah. So I returned to Canada after that. In 1993, I returned to Canada. And in 94, when Meitatsu Sensei removed me from that organization, I was looking around, and through some serendipitous occurrence, my phone rang one day, and it was Hamada Taishin, the international representative of the Dainippon Butoku Kai. And but he may have been returning my call. I can't remember if I called him first, but I probably did. Anyhow, I remember talking to Hanshi Hamada for the first time on the telephone. We had met in Japan, but neither one of us realized that then. And he asked me to represent them in Canada, to work with them. And I said, I really wasn't interested because I've just gone through all this work I did for this other Okinawan organization just to get removed from it after all that time, effort, energy, and expense. And it was all for somebody's profit. I really wasn't interested in doing that again. But as Hamada Sensei explained the organization to me, and as a non-profit group, and as I learned more about it that way, I was very comfortable moving into that position. But I must say, there was a point where I said to Hanshi Hamada, no, thank you, I'd rather not. And he said, you took the certificate. What do you say to that? Yes, I did. I took the certificate. Yep. So I had to bow and say, okay. And fortunately, my work with the Dainippon Butoku Sai since that time has been good, I think, for Canadians across the country. And I continue to work in that capacity for that group. It is completely non-profit. No one gets paid through this organization other than the few head administrative staff in the United States and Japan. It's been a privilege to be associated with so many like-minded people who are willing to sacrifice their time, money, effort, and energy for the preservation of classical Japanese martial arts for future generations. That's our mission. And to be involved with people who share that has been a true privilege. And I know many of you, ladies and gentlemen, on this call right now feel the very same, that the preservation of classical Japanese martial arts for future generations is a worthwhile cause. So
Thanks,
keep
Sensei. Hanshi, that's amazing. And I just want to say, Edward Kamau, and Paul Dupree, who asked questions around Sensei Yagi Mitoku. I think you got your answers there, and we appreciate you asking those questions. So before we get into the 10 questions for you, Hanshi, which we ask all our guests, it's time, everybody. Hi, this is Don Warner from WarnerEntertainment.com. We're proud to be one of the sponsors of Punch, Kick, Choke, Chat. We encourage you to visit our website at WARRENER entertainment.com and get your free copy of Warriors Magazine today. We have over 2,500 items, including books, DVDs, downloads, rare posters, lots more, featuring some of the biggest names, including Shotokan's Hirokazu Kanazawa, Goju Ryu's Chuck Merriman, Ninja Stephen Hayes, legendary Joe Louis, and that's just the beginning. That's WarnerEntertainment.com, WARRENER. And also, we're really happy to have that sponsorship, and we'll see how that goes. Sensei Dauphin?
Yeah, I spent some time, Sean, and I read through the latest magazine. And Hanshi Legacy and probably Hanshi Tallack will smirk when I say this, but there's a good article in there about Count Dante.
Oh,
the deadliest man alive, right? So,
shit.
The magazines are good, right? And again, talking about it's easy today, right? Grab that magazine and just have a look at it. You'll learn something for sure.
Thanks, Sensei. That's awesome. And by the way, speaking of easy today, again, I push this a little. This is one of my soapboxes on this show. Did you text your sensei today and say, sorry, I couldn't make the Zoom class. My Wi-Fi is funny? Or did you fucking move to Japan so that you could learn Japanese, so that you could understand what your sensei was telling you and get an apartment near them? Which of those did you do today? Because our guest tonight did the second one. Make sure you're not doing the first one. If you can't get 30 minutes away to see your sensei, or if you can't figure out a way to get your Wi-Fi working where you can literally do martial arts in your own basement with your master sensei, well, someone like Hanshi Tallack had to go all the way to literally Japan, literally learn a new language. We have it so easy today, people. And it's a beautiful thing. I'm grateful for it. But I love hearing that story, Hanshi, and I appreciate it. There's all the stories in and around that. Time for your 10 questions. Answer as impulsively as you can and elaborate as you wish. What is the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
Running. I run constantly. It's good for my heart and it keeps me from getting hit.
Who is the most influential martial artist in your life?
You know, in the early part of my life, it was definitely, well, Bob Wilcox. Then it was, you know, Bob Dalglish. Then it was Yagi Meitoku. But for the past many years, it's been Hamada Teishin. And he is, you know, I've got a couple of people who I want to model my life after. And I want to mention one very quickly named Ishikawa Seitoku. Ishikawa Seitoku sensei was of the Shorin Ryu lineage of Miyahira sensei. Was the master of their Ryuha of Shorin Ryu. Ishikawa sensei lived downstairs from me. I saw him every day. And he was in his dojo. Well, at 5:30 in the morning, he would be out and he would run around the seawall in Naha City. He'd be back in his dojo by 6:15 and train till 7 a.m. Then he would go and eat, get dressed and shower and go and be in his office by 8. He walked the seawall at lunchtime and he taught karate at night. And I lived there. He had the main floor of the building that I lived in. He was my landlord. And to see him live this way, I learned to live as a martial artist. Hamada Teishin Hanshi has helped me learn how to, you know, when you do something, you make a living, that's what it gives you. But when you do something that's for your life, that's what you give that back. And Hanshi Hamada, it's all about giving back to your society, giving back to your community. He walks the walk. He has done it. He's put his life's energy, his professional life, everything he's done has been for the betterment of Budo and the development of a stronger society. And he's just an admirable human being. He's a human being. None of us perfect, but he is an admirable person. When I attended a ceremony in Virginia Beach at the Dainippon Butoku Sai garden that they have in Red Wing Park, at the unveiling of a new section that Hanshi had donated to the Red Wing Park. And all of these local officials came forward and talked about all of the things this man had done for his community. He never mentioned a thing ever. I never heard him say anything about these things, but when I heard others speak of him, and the mayor and the council person and the assistant attorney general for the state of North Carolina or something, prestigious people speaking so well of him, and they didn't know he could punch and kick. Anyhow, sorry, that's a long answer.
It's a beautiful answer. Thank you for that. Who do you think is the most influential martial artist of all time and why?
Well, Bob Dalglish and I talked about this. Jesus Christ would be. Bob had a theory that Jesus Christ had wandered to India at one time in his life and had taken up, is it Kavrilat? Sorry, I can't remember how to pronounce the name of the ancient Indian martial art that was practiced before Kung Fu went to China. Anyhow, that was an answer that Bob Dalglish gave me to that very same question. But for me, I would think personally in my world, Kamryo Higona Kamro Sensei.
What excites you most about the next 5 years of your training?
Just doing it, just being there and doing it. You know, I just want to keep doing it. Earlier tonight, I was in the dojo and I was doing Seisan Kata. And yeah, I still practice it. The Seisan, you know, from the Shiko Dachi, shift to Zenkutsu Dachi. We used to call it Chito-Ru Seisan. I do that, but of course, tonight I was doing Goju-Ru Seisan. And I just hope that 10 years from now, I'm doing the same thing.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get there?
Never thought of that. I guess, come in.
Yeah.
That's the same answer Hanshi Legacy gave. He said he wanted to hear it welcome. That's
Yeah, that's it. Well,
yeah. Who's your favorite film and TV martial artist?
Gee, I don't really know that I have one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I am actually astounded at the variety of martial arts techniques we see in these shows these days. My goodness. They have come up with so many ways to punch, kick, choke, and stab, spear, and decapitate human beings on these movies that I have a hard time following it.
No problem. What martial artist, living or dead, would you like to train with the most for, let's say, an hour?
Well, you know, I would love to get another hour with Kuwahara Sensei. Kuwahara Sensei is 96 years old. He's 96 years old, and he still takes the falls in his jiu-jitsu demonstration. No mats. No mats. And he's taking the falls. He came here to Kingston in the year 2011 when we hosted the World Butoku Sai here in Kingston, Ontario. And Kuwahara Hanshi came. And just the other day, I stood on a brick patio where he was doing ukemi. And he was, yeah, that'd be nice.
If everyone in the world could have the greatest benefit you've gotten from martial arts, whether they train or not, what would it be?
I think if you put it in one word, you're going to say confidence. But how about a willingness to pay the price to lead the life you feel you should? Yeah, a willingness to pay the price to lead the life you think you should.
We're seeing a lot of nodding heads on the other end of the call right now, Hanshi.
Well,
and our
good.
last two questions come as one. Greatest achievement, greatest regret.
Oh, I'm still working on stuff. I don't have a great achievement yet, you know. I think a contribution I made unwittingly, didn't mean to, but I did introduce Okinawa Goju-Ryu to Canada. I was the first person to teach it and spread it. And, but it was just coincidence that I was the first guy to do that. And I think that Ron Yamanaka, while I was living in Japan in 90, 91, 92, 93, Ron Yamanaka was making massive progress with spreading Okinawa Goju-Ryu across Canada. And I know that we really owe him a big debt. But I played my part. It was good. My biggest regret is probably not working harder when I was younger. Yeah. You got to work harder when you're young.
I hear that one.
Yeah.
I hear that one. I'm going to sneak in one question before we go around the horn and take our way out, because we really appreciate the questions that come in. And so I'm just going to ask this question from Jonathan Brenneman. What is the greatest advancement that you've seen in karate since you first began?
Well, I think the separation between kickboxing and karate is a great thing, because if you want to do contact training, you really should be wearing proper equipment. Or like Hanshi Legacy said, you won't be doing it for very long, right? You need the longer, if you want to practice longer, you got to put the gear on. Separating kickboxing allowed kickboxing to develop as its own natural sport rather than as an adjunct of karate. The first kickboxing that I ever did was putting on boxing gloves and punching and kicking each other. And we trained on it from there. Separating those things allowed us to really look at, well, what is point fighting? And we developed continuous point fighting. And people separated kickboxing from forms practice, which separated sport from art. And I like that.
Right on. Great question, and I really appreciate that answer. So Hanshi, the way we go out is that we go around the horn, and we all sort of, you know, give a bit of perspective on the time we've had with you, and then the last word will go to you. Aside from a little bit of housekeeping on our end, and everybody gets to hear the ad one more time later on. So I want to throw it to Hanshi Legacy right now.
Good interview, Ken. I really enjoyed it. It brought back a lot of stuff. I didn't realize you traveled so much. I was glad to hear that. And I'm really happy for you that you had all those opportunities and that you ended up being who you are now. Because only you and I sort of, but it was rough for you and I at the beginning, right?
It was.
Yeah, the teachers weren't so friendly, and it made us not be quite as good friends as we should have been. But I learned a lot about you today, and I can appreciate why you're a good martial artist and a life martial artist.
Well, if I could just throw this back at you there, Gary, we didn't know each other very well. But there came a time when you closed your club, and Leo Laux, Bob Folkart, a couple of other guys came and started training with me because I had a place that was open and you were not at that time. And the way they spoke about you, Mike Bernardo, of course, the way they spoke about you, the way they performed, the way they referred to you made me realize you were something special. It was obvious. And the way they felt about you, that really meant a lot to me. I saw your character reflected in your students.
Thanks, Ken. I feel warm right now.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you do.
Thanks,
Thank
gentlemen. Sensei Suino?
Well, I have to say, Hanshi Tallack, even though you didn't bring the name up, this is the first episode of Punch, Kick, Choke, and Chat where anybody has mentioned the name of Count Dante. So that's pretty cool. I know Randy takes notes on this, and I love how he kind of reprises his highlights. So I've been typing, and I've got a whole list of great things that came up in this conversation tonight.
Say them.
Well,
don't let me hold you up, Sensei. Say them.
Well, I'm going to say two of them, and then I just want to. But first, it's really cool that you describe your Hokkaido to Okinawa travels. While you were there, I was in Tokyo, so you flew over me on your way to Okinawa. Had we known each other,
I drove the entire country.
Oh my gosh! Well, you should have stopped in for a beer. I used to drink more beer than I do now.
We spent a week at the Holiday Inn in Tokyo.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, because they had free parking. They did.
Yeah, I mean, who thinks about parking? I never, I rented a car like twice in 4 years in Japan. Anyway, they're great. That's crazy. Had we known each other, that would have been amazing. I did spend some time in Okinawa, but just for short visits. Let me just say three things that came up that I really loved tonight. One was the thing that Gary mentioned, right? That you echoed, It's always the martial arts calling the great people, right? The martial arts call the great people. And then you said that lovely quote from your wife, people come from us for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. So that was one thing I wanted to mention. I was very moved by the expression you said, and I'm going to make a mash of it, but I just have these two, what you do versus what you give, right? What you do versus what you give. When it's something you're giving, you're making a life out of it. And the last quote, I think all of us are going to take away and hold on to, is a willingness to pay the price to live the life you think you should. So thank you for all of those things and the memories that you shared tonight.
Thank you, Sensei Suino. Sensei Dauphin?
I gotta put my glasses on. Hanshi Tallack, I always write all these notes. I've got like 3 or 4 notebooks. Like this one says, good ideas start with great coffee. That's the notebook that I have right now. But it's crazy to me how many of the people we've had on this call started in judo and stayed in judo, have a super strong appreciation for judo. I really liked hearing just the different names, like even Bob Wilcox. I guess it was maybe 10 years ago that Sensei Legacy and I went back down to London for his birthday. And I can't remember which birthday it was, but I think it was like his 70th birthday or something like that. And I met so many people on that day when we were there. And I think it's really cool that you were super proud that you knew what Giden Barai was when you met Bob Wilcox, and you were super excited to be that. It's awesome. We all have something. I think it's really cool that at 15 you had a key to the dojo and you were in there teaching. There's no 15-year-old in my club that wouldn't want that. They're all jealous of you. Obviously, it's nice to hear things about Sensei Legacy. It's nice to hear when you talk about his fight in 1973 and seeing him. In my mind, I wasn't there, obviously, but I can picture it. Like, I can picture him in 1973 walking out to that ring, and I wish I could have been there. So it was really nice to hear that. I like hearing all that history about London, Ontario, and it really reinforces a lot of things that Sensei Legacy has said to me over the last 32 years. I super like when we talk about it being easy or hard, that when you said the twin sword kata that you did, you were doing with machetes. That's, that's pretty awesome, right? Now, on a serious note, being with the Salvation Army and jumping on trains to go to Winnipeg and then jumping off at the right spot and seeing that Goju-Ryu fist, I think you're 100% right. It's these chance moments in life that, what if you didn't jump off that train at that time? How many people would have been affected by you jumping off at the wrong time and place? That's something that everybody should kind of ponder. Those random moments that lead to things, right? Obviously, your wife is a genius. The reason, the season, or the lifetime. I really liked how you described living in the mountains in northern Japan. For me, it made me think of Richard Kim's stories and reading The Weaponless Warrior and walking down these paths and doing these things. So I hope Hanshi McCarthy watches this and hears about you talking about how it was a great time always to party with Hanshi McCarthy. I hope I get to party with him one day. It's really cool that you lived in Okinawa.
Sorry, at the party I was talking about, Pat got up and sang like a 15-minute long song in Japanese language.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, it was astounding. Right?
For 15 minutes, yes.
Oh, it went on and on and on. It was a long one. Sorry.
No, it's all good. Yeah, we all would like to hear that song. I liked that when you talked about when you moved to Okinawa to live next to Mitoku Sensei. That's awesome. Like, to just envision that. It's really come clear, Hanshi, that you see it's a privilege to work with the DMDK and to keep preserving classical martial arts and moving it forward. That came through. I like when you said your most effective move is running. I say that all the time in here. Just run. Like if you can run, you should just run. You probably will have less regrets if you run, right? Um, uh, when you said about Jesus Christ being the best martial artist, it made me think about Hanshi Legacy seeing Richard Kim once bow to a picture of Jesus Christ and saying to him, Jesus was a great Buddha, right? That's a thought that I had when you, and obviously Sensei Suino said it, like, pay the price that you need to lead the life you know that you should. That's something I'm going to write on my whiteboard, and that's something that's my students are going to hear. So thank you so much for being with us tonight and teaching us all these great lessons. I'm extremely grateful.
Thanks, Sensei Dauphin. And then I'm just going to chip in a little here before we give you the last word and then go out on some housekeeping. For me, the three things that really jumped out on me, you know, the one is just watching you and how thoughtful and present you become with your memories was just an utter treat for me. Regardless of what the memory was, it was as though you were reliving it. And whether you are or not, I feel the weight of those moments in your life. And it's a really beautiful thing to be a part of them as you tell them. You know, the other thing for me is when you're talking about the people who are influential in your life, I love that you have different phases, you know, and that you currently have people who currently in real time are your role models. I think it'd be real easy at a certain point and a certain station in life, and you look at the Black Belt Hall of Fame and the this and that, and you're like, I'm good. And it's like, no, today in real time. I love that you have current role models. And lastly, watching you and Hanshi Legacy just say hello at the end there in a way that you maybe hadn't. I felt warm too, Hanshi Legacy. It's one of the real gifts this show. Sensei Dauphin?
Yeah, I want to mention to Hanshi Tallack that you had some fairly prestigious people tonight watching you before Sean punts it back over to you. Hanshi John Tarian was on the call tonight watching you. Kiyoshi Adet Rice, Kiyoshi Doug Knipsel, Sensei Conrad Copeland, three of our senior students from Legacy Shorin-ryu, Scott Bauer, John Kettleberger, and Nick McLaren. So you attract a crowd, Hanshi.
And also on that note, Sensei Copeland did say that's a great story. After all these years of knowing you, I never realized this awesome was meant to be. And that was around you finding your way to the dojo in Sudbury. And thank you, Sammy Ward, for your question. I do think that he answered in many, many ways how he's learned to live and act properly through the martial arts, but we do appreciate the question. So we'll give this back to you, Hanshi, for the last word, and then I'm going to read the ad again, and Sensei Dauphin is going to tell us about our next 2 weeks.
Well, it's just been a wonderful privilege to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I see Dennis Butler's been watching, and Chris Ecclestone, a couple of Kingston residents, and maybe Dennis is transplanted to London right now. You know, Dennis Butler is a person who inspires me constantly. Denny defeated cancer. He defeated the aftermath. He went on to become an international bodybuilding champion, as well as he will receive a certificate for Rokudan and Renshi. He's already Renshi, sorry. He'll receive a certificate for Rokudan of Karate Do. And, you know, he just doesn't let it stop him. He does it every day. And we talk about being inspired. My students lead me. I'm inspired by the people I get to associate with. And I guess you're all included in that now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hanshi. So before we talk about next week, hi, this is Don Warner from Warner Entertainment, WARRENER Entertainment. We're proud to be one of the sponsors of Punch, Kick, Choke, Chat. We encourage you to visit our website at warnerentertainment.com. Get your free copy of Warriors Magazine today. Over 2,500 items, including books, DVDs, downloads, rare posters, and lots more, featuring some of the biggest names in martial arts: Shotokan's Hirokazu Kanazawa, Goju's Chuck Merriman, Ninja Stephen Hayes, legendary Joe Louis, and that's just the beginning. That's warnerentertainment.com, WARRENER. And thanks for listening. Keep smiling. Sensei Dauphin, what do we got coming up for the next 2 weeks?
I also just want to say, I know I keep jumping on your ad, but I want to. Kenizawa Sensei is a real badass. Like if you can learn something by reading about Kenizawa Sensei, you totally should. We have students in our club, like, you know, you had the opportunity to train with Hidetaka Nishiyama, who is like a peer of Kenizawa Sensei. That's one of my most favorite pictures, is seeing those two guys standing there in a fighting stance against each other. Like, so, but anyway, I digress because you bring this up and it makes me think thoughts. But next couple of weeks are super exciting. We got one of the greatest Canadian kickboxing champions coming on, which is Daryl Hennigan. Probably Hanshi Tallack knows him. Recently, I saw a super great picture of him with a little kid sitting in between Daryl Hennigan and Jean-Yves Thériault. And I looked at this picture and I thought, that freaking kid doesn't even know how lucky he is to be sitting in between those two guys. So anyway, really nice man, great champion. And I'm super excited that we're going to have the chance to talk to him and hear his story. And then, man, this is a first for Punch Kick Choke Chat. We're going to have three Hanshis on the call simultaneously. Obviously, we're going to have Hanshi Legacy, who's the one who's always on the call, but we're going to have Hanshi Cesar Burkowski and Hanshi John Therrien on the call together after that. And I'm looking forward to it because it can just be a fun chat. Like, I think it's going to bring forward that essence of a bunch of people just sitting around shooting the shit about martial arts. I think this was much like that, but it's not often that you're going to get three people on a call that have 50 years of experience together, right? Like they've literally been hanging around with each other for 50 years. And so I'm really excited for this call to come forward. And then, you know, you throw Sensei Suino into that, and we got 200 years of martial arts experience around 4 people. And then the slackers like you and I, Sean, who only have like 30 or just slightly less than 30 years, right? To chip in.
Scratching at seriousness.
Yeah, like just trying to get to the 50-year mark, right?
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you so much. I mean, those are going to be incredible. And the last thing I want to say is thank you to everybody for watching. We genuinely love you all, whether you're watching in real time, later, or listening on any of the podcast platforms. And thank you so much to the people who make this show happen: Robert Shlumsky, Mike Russell, Victoria Feth, Justin Shea, Alden Adair, Andrei Sedashev. And we'll see y'all next week, everybody. Be safe.
Thanks, Hanshi Tallack. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, Ken. Hope to talk to you soon.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
All right.
Hey, Lynn Dwight.